Hello there, everyone, and welcome to this week's version of Naked Talk with Beyond the Bedroom. And I have to read this because we're not quite memorized yet. Naked Talk is where we get naked in a conversation of sexuality, intimacy, and relationship. We strip down and expose the bare facts so that you can learn what it takes for your life and love to thrive. We'd like to thank our sponsor, TantraPM, your online resource for all materials related to sacred and spiritual sexuality. Please check them out at www.tantrapm.org. So this is going to be a juicy one. It's our first time we've had guests with us. So I'm going to turn it over to Dan to make some introductions.
Yeah. Well, and first, before we get into that, I want to apologize for last night. I know we're doing this 12 hours delayed from when we were originally going to do it. I became deathly ill. It felt like death, but I became pretty ill right before we were going to start. And TantraPM people, Mark and Patricia, were graceful enough to allow us to postpone and re-air this today. And I know a number of people called us and sent emails wanting to know what was going on. We tried to post on Facebook so everybody knew that we were being delayed, but yeah, that's how it is. Things happen when we try to do live events, and that was one of them for us.
So thanks for everybody's patience.
Yeah, so I want to introduce tonight's guest couple. They're with TantraPM, or our TantraPM, Mark Michaels and Patricia Johnson, otherwise known as Michaels and Johnson. Get the playoff of Masters and Johnson. And we met them last year when we were going to have them come out for the Beyond the Bedroom event before we had to cancel it, and then we ran into them again recently at the ASEC conference. They will be here next Tuesday live and in person, but before we had that, we wanted to go ahead and bring them on to Naked Talks and talk with them a little bit about what they're going to be talking about and go through their new book that they've got coming out, which is why I believe that they're in Colorado. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. So how are you guys doing today?
We're doing all right.
Pretty
it's
good.
little tired. It's not accustomed to doing interviews this early, although we have from time to time. But we're also in the middle of our kind of other passion, which is nature and conservation. And the turtles are nesting in our area, so we're out scouting nest sites. And Patricia was out till 1 o'clock this morning monitoring nests.
So yeah, they don't carry a watch. I don't know why. I keep on asking them to.
What are you talking about? That's only 11 o'clock our time. Come on, what's up?
So save the turtles. Thank you for doing that on behalf of all of us turtle lovers.
Yay.
Yeah. So you have a book that's coming out.
A new book.
That's your fourth book, I believe, right?
Yeah.
It actually came out in February. So
it came out. Okay, good. And so the title of it is called Partners in Passion, A Guide to Great Sex, Emotional Intimacy, and Long-Term Love. And yeah, I think that's a great title. I get so often clients that come to me, and I know that Elizabeth talks to some as well, that are asking, well, how do we keep our relationship passionate? How do we keep it alive? In this day and age of everything that's going on, there's so much that's out there. So, why don't you just tell us a little bit about your book?
Well, it really. What?
Where do we begin? It runs the gamut from beginning of a relationship through older years, or long.
The entire life cycle, really.
Yeah.
And it's. We really strive to be inclusive of all relationship styles, orientations, gender expressions. It's kind of a summation of our 15 years of working with couples and teaching Tantra. And our background in Tantra is kind of interwoven throughout the book, although it's not a Tantra book per se. And where the Tantric concept, I think, comes in most strongly is in the idea that a relationship is a practice. It's not something that's fixed. When you don't live happily ever after.
Right.
It's something that you have to tend to and nurture and care for.
But not work at. I mean, that's
Or
something
work
people
on.
work on our relationship, like, and I think when people bring up that comment, we need to work on our relationship, usually it just indicates that they've spent probably quite some time not nurturing their relationship. But thinking of something laborious to resurrect.
That it's drudgery, or and there is research, and I don't have the citation for it, but a therapist told me this not long ago, that couples generally wait 5 or 6 years before they get into any kind of counseling situation. 5 or 6 years past the point of there being serious problems.
So all parties involved agree that things are really off track for that long.
Yes.
So,
and the idea of working on the relationship often is something that emerges at that, after things have really gone off the rails.
Right.
What we encourage is for people to make it a daily, again, practice to tend to their relationship, to interact with one another, and really to focus not so much on the self or on the needs that you want your partner to fulfill for you, but on where that other person is, and how, and really be interested in them, really care about how they are living their lives.
Well, I think that's beautiful. What I was thinking when you were saying that was and I love the words, the relationship is a practice. I often tell couples that relationship is like a garden. And so the metaphor is the same. You have to tend to it every day. You have to check the soil, or the water. You have to pluck out those weeds. It really is a wonderful metaphor. And you can I'm looking outside at our garden right now, all the different varieties. You have to take care of the little, garlic sprigs and make sure they're not overcrowding the daffodils, and then the daisies come up at a different time. So the daily practice, I think, really, you can link it to something else like a garden, because it isn't work. People talk about how meditative it is to be out there in a garden tending. And if we can translate that into relationship, it's perfect. It's not work. It's tending to and nurturing. So I'm really happy you brought that up. It's beautiful.
Yeah, and I agree. I think especially I had never heard that statistic before, but it makes a lot of sense that when people wait until it's so far into their relationship and they've gone through those critical missteps that have started the relationship on the downfall, it becomes work. And I know I hate working in the yard. Hate. When I had to do it as a kid, mowing the yard in hot Florida summers, and it was not fun. But I love growing things that I know I'm going to get back, in the sense of fruit trees and things like that. So I love tending to those. And I've got key lime trees here in Colorado, and I've been working on them now for 3 years. And I've gone through my trials and tribulations with them, and I finally had one die out of 5, and I love it. I love maintaining them and checking on them, and I get really upset when something happens to them. But it's tending it the whole time, so that's great.
So what you're describing here is something that it's, I guess, a definition of love that we learned from our teacher's teacher, and that is profound interest. Love is profound interest. And so when you think of something like growing your key lime trees, you're profoundly interested in their well-being. And it's, I think that's a real embodiment of what profound interest is. I mean, people have that toward their hobbies or toward their pets or toward certain projects, but they just suddenly don't think to apply that to their partner.
Yeah.
Well, so let's say that Dan really loves his key lime tree.
I do.
We also use the language of art when we're talking about relationships. And we talk about a relationship as a collaborative co-creation akin to a work of art. And we use collaborative does have the root labor in it, but it implies a much more mutual kind of undertaking, not not something that's done because you have to, but something because you want to create something.
Right. The labor of love.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and that co-creation is actually, I feel, a third entity, and the relationship is that entity that actually becomes, to me, very, very real, living, breathing, part, that isn't just you alone and your partner alone, and then where you cross, something exponential happens with that nurturing, and it does take on a life of its own. I know, because we'd never be able to write books if that wasn't happening.
Now, I wanted to go back to the kind of waiting 5 years before seeking help aspect that seems to be common, and to refer to Partners in Passion. I think often books that are written by therapists, because of the nature of their work and when they're seeing people, I think their perspective is a little bit shaped by the fact that they're dealing with people in crisis, or people who've reached a point where the relationship's no longer viable. And a lot of times I was in a marriage before Patricia, and certainly we did couples therapy, and it was mostly a way of splitting up in the least painful way possible. So therapy gets this kind of very extreme, skewed vision of the way relationships are. One of the things we wanted to do in Partners in Passion is write a book that's based on what works for people, and find people. We interviewed lots and lots of people in all different kinds of relationships. Find people who are happy, who are thriving, whose relationships are going well.
Figure out what they're doing. Let's examine that, not the people who are unhappy. Knowing more about unhappiness, I don't know if suddenly makes you happy. I think it has its function sometimes, but really look at who is really happy, who's really vibrant, who's really excited and deeply and madly in love 23 years later, and see how they're behaving, and what are their habits, what are their practices, what's their skill set, and you'll find that it doesn't matter how the relationship looks on the outside. Whether they're kinky or have multiple partners, or they're, long-term, exclusive, they all have certain skill sets, and that's what we need to be examining. More, I think we get caught up on how relationships look on the outside.
The one mainstream person who has done this very well is John Gottman, of course, but there's still too much of the kind of very negative way of looking at things, and I think it's much more valuable to say, hey, what works, and go from there.
Yeah, it's interesting. Sorry to cut you off here. There in the business world, there's a guy, Napoleon Hill, who wrote a book, Think and Grow Rich, and he did the exact same thing. He said, instead of looking at what's going wrong with all these businesses, he looked at all the people that were really powerful and very successful, the Henry Fords and the Carnegie Mellons of the world, and interviewed them to find out, well, what are you doing that makes you so successful? How are you powerful and able to grow rich as readily as it seems like you're doing? And that book was written in the early 20th century, so it's great that somebody's finally applying it here.
Yeah. So what did you find? Can you share some of their secrets with our audience?
Oh, a lot of times people in long-term relationships are really deeply in love, but one area of dissatisfaction is sexuality, and the amount of sex and how sexuality plays out in the relationship. One current you'll find with all long-term, vibrant, sexually erotically engaged couples is this curiosity and seeking new information, always looking for the new, always, I'm going to read that book, let's go to that workshop, let's try this. It's a never-ending journey for these people, whereas sometimes when we're out in like a general bookstore, book signing or something, somebody will say, oh,
I don't need that.
We don't need that. And to which I always answer, really? You know everything about sexuality? Because I've spent years of my life studying this, and I haven't gotten there. How did you suddenly know everything? And it's it's a sad thing, right? That people are so unhappy, yet they're not willing to accept that maybe they don't know something and that they could learn something.
I think mutuality too is really, really a common theme, that people who are in happy, thriving relationships make the relationship a priority and mutually agree that the relationship is a priority. This is something that, if you've been with someone a long time, it's really easy to start taking them and the relationship for granted and not tending to it in the way that we've been describing. And so it really is important for people to decide together that, yes, the relationship is important, and we're going to take a little time every day to pay attention to it. So often they just don't. They buy into the myth of living happily ever after, the idea that you've found someone, you've gotten married, you've landed the one that you want, and now we're done. It'll all take care of itself from here on. And 5 years down the road, that's not going to work.
Yeah, well, and I think we have a tendency to take that concept of marriage as ownership, which I think is what marriage originally was, and we take that to heart. It's like, okay, I'm now married, so I own you. I don't really have to work on my relationship anymore. I can, go and do other kinds of things, and my marriage is always going to be here. And in this day and age, with the divorce rates, and it's so easy to become divorced, it's, people are having to change that thought process, I think. So I love what it is you're saying about that.
Well, there's a little complicating factor in the idea of marriage. And if you look at the history of marriage, yes, for the upper classes, it was about property and it was about ownership. But in the lower and middle classes until the modern period, marriage was usually much more of a pragmatic business arrangement. And the idea that romantic love should be a factor in marriage was really, if anything, romantic love was looked on as antithetical to having a good marriage.
So these couples would have a joint purpose, or they would run a
shop or an inn or a farm together.
And together they created, so the vision was joint on what their purpose was. So this is something that I think got lost with the elevation of romantic love as the central factor in people pairing up, and that's having a shared sense of purpose. That's really been lost. So another thing that couples, I think, can do to really, re-find each other is to develop habits, to develop things that are really mutual projects, where it's not one person saying, oh, I want you to tend to the yard or whatever it is. It's what can we do? We do together, and we call it like a joint adventure. Those are best when they're sexual joint adventures.
Well, I don't know about best, but there's certainly one great way to have adventures together.
But they can also entail, Mark and I go out in the field together, or taking a cooking lesson together, kayaking together.
And this is why people have more sex when they go on vacation. In the sort of most basic form, they're on an adventure together. They're doing something that's really a mutual thing.
Solely for themselves too, right? Solely for their enjoyment together. So,
right.
And so then the erotic kind of flows from that. And if you don't have some kind of common purpose, other than children, I would say. I mean,
I don't think. Having children, I think that's statistically proven that that the sexual and relational satisfaction goes down with having children.
So if people have children, they generally speaking have to make even a more concerted effort to nurture the relationship and tend to it. And we did interview couples with kids, some very young kids in the book. And the ones, the people who are thriving, it's like, no, we put locks on the doors. We have our date nights. As soon as we leave the kids with a sitter, we did.
Yeah.
And if you can't afford a sitter, hopefully you have a relative or a good friend who can fill in. But it's really, really important at that stage to make a conscious effort to turn toward each other, to focus on each other, and not to be just totally consumed by the children or child.
Yeah.
And I think that's changed over the days. I mean, my parents, you know, it was very different. My parents made their relationship a top priority, and somehow, I mean, our culture, and there's so much focus on the kids, and I agree with you. Setting boundaries and putting limits on when they're available, carving out some together time, you know, that's a wonderful model for relationship for the children that they're raising. Because let's be honest, the first example of relationship is if you're with a female figure and a male figure, or a male-male, that's your first experience of relationship. And if it's healthy, and if it's thriving, and if it's functioning and tended to, like we say, what a great example of what you will then seek in your future. So, you know, I'm in full agreement with you that we really have to pay attention to what we're modeling for our youth. So great.
Yeah, and
great
I would
story.
say with the whole baby on board thing that came about recently, I'm wondering if parents are finding less and less time for themselves and more for their children, because there's such a focus on how do we take care of our children, how do we nurture our children, you know, baby on board. We don't have locks on our doors so that our kids can come get to us at any time. I was married formally as well, and we had that issue. We had a couple kids, and sex life was gone for the most part.
Yeah, so they put couples tend to put their sex lives on hold until they launch the kids and they're an empty nest. Hello, people.
Right.
Sometimes be 18 now in this economy, 21, 22, 23
30.
years.
Yeah, right. It's very true, and I mean it's a big cultural problem. There was a discussion in the Modern Love column in the New York Times a few months ago about gosh, I can't remember her name. She's a writer. Waldman, I think, is her last name. I can't remember her first name, but she wrote a piece 5 or 6 years ago saying that she loved her husband more than her kids, which was kind of a provocative statement. But the whole argument was, I make my sex life a priority, and I have a great sex life with my husband, and I'm not willing to let the fact that I have 4 children make me into a non-sexual person. And apparently she went on the Oprah show and was just castigating
Can you imagine?
people for saying this.
Yeah.
And the truth is, like, if this is Patricia's observation, but if the roof is falling down, you know, I mean, they're not tending to the house. They're letting the roof cave in.
Right.
If that's what their attitude is.
Right. The sense of stability and deep love in your parents make you feel secure as a child. If they don't have that and they're focused on you and you feel that that foundation is caving,
and they're not connected.
I mean, you can't pay attention. You can't dote on a child out of that sense of panic, right?
Well, integrity is what makes the relationship. If it's out of integrity, then it's not going to be able to support. And I'm not using integrity as a bad, you're a bad person because you're out of integrity, as much as structurally, like you're talking about the housing foundation. If the integrity of the structure of the house isn't sound, the house is going to collapse. If the integrity of your relationship isn't sound, your relationship's going to collapse. And what kind of model is that for children to be able to see and grow up in?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Leave it to an engineer to talk about the structure of a relationship.
They started it.
Oh,
We did start it.
We started it.
That's great. And I do remember when she was on the Oprah show, and I was not in the audience, but watching on TV. It was brilliant, and I was so sad that she was raked over the coals and scrutinized the way she was. She took a massive risk and said something that was her truth and actually so valuable to other couples. I applauded her then. I applaud her today. I should probably try to find that article. She may have turned it into a book. I'm not quite sure. But she went on, obviously, the most public of all public stations, the Oprah show, and said her truth. And again, it was beautiful. It was brilliant. I know we're digressing here. We have a number of questions specifically about the book, but then again, we don't want to give away the whole store because you will be here visiting with us live and in person for actually more than this full hour. You'll be in front of an audience for 90
minutes.
Yeah, for 90 minutes. So I want to give the audience a teaser and a taste, actually more of who you are. You're a long-term couple. You've been together
15
years. And that's, I mean, that's magnificent. Can you tell our audience a little bit about your backgrounds, how you two crossed lives, where you met? I think that it's always exciting for me. I know a little bit about it. But I'd love to hear your story and have you share that with our viewers.
Okay, sure. You want to go first?
Yeah. Geez. Our common interest is in Tantra. So I first got introduced to Tantra during my early college years, and that was because some of my early sexual experiences seemed to be sometimes life-transforming, amazing, and then other times sort of, I could have read a book that night instead, you know, and I didn't. I wanted to know why. Because to know if there was something about sexual energy that you could tap into and you could cultivate and share with partners. And so that led me to learning about sex magic, Western sex magic practices, Taoist practices, and Tantra. And I started reading about these things. Got a great library of books, brought them to whoever I was seeing at the time and said, hey, what do you think of this? You know, and they would go, you know, you know,
I don't need to know anything more about it.
But, you know, I mean, we were in our 20s and having conversations about sex. I mean, just having it and holding it together, I think, is tough when you're young. To actually have a conversation about it was a little bit beyond a lot of people. So I just kept studying on my own, and once you start to understand sexuality that goes beyond your physical body, but into more of a cultivating of the life force, or just tapping into juicy, erotic, vibrant stuff, then your sexuality is forever changed. Once you understand that concept, your sexuality, your sex life with yourself, your sex life with whomever is forever changed. Then I went on. My previous life, I was an opera singer, so I had a big international career, and landed in New York. And I saw that there was a lecture on Tantra going on, and it turned out to be Mark's first lecture after he finished a Tantra teacher training. So
my experience was kind of similar to Patricia's in that in some of my early sexual encounters in my teens, I had these, you know, profound experiences. And then other times it was good, but it was just good, not this kind of spectacular thing. And so I had this intuitive sense that there was something really profound and powerful in sex. But I, too, didn't know how to make that happen at will. It seemed to be a random occurrence. Unlike Patricia, I didn't have a career as an opera singer. I got married. I got into a relationship. I got into a relationship, and she, as an opera singer, really kind of thought that she would never have
a relationship,
long-term partnership with one person.
I mean, most singers actually don't. Professional. I mean, it's tough on them.
Yeah.
So I went to law school, met the woman who became my first wife when I was in law school. At 21, 22 maybe, and we were together for like 12 or 13 years or something like that. And at some point during the marriage, we got a couple of books on Tantra. I looked at them and they really didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. They just seemed new agey and weird.
Too many diagrams and lines.
And language that didn't resonate with me.
Mm-hmm.
So I sort of filed it away, and the marriage broke up, and I went through a kind of reassessment of who I was that took several years during the mid-'90s. And at some point, I started looking around at Tantra stuff on the internet, which was kind of just coming into being at the time. And
dial up.
and I found that there was a weekend workshop going on at Harbin Hot Springs in California that had a Tantra component to it that wasn't exclusively Tantra. And I thought, this is about my speed. I'm not ready to commit to doing a full weekend of something that seems so out there. And but I'll do a weekend with a little bit of Tantra and sort of see how it feels. And I'll book a session with the teacher the day before the weekend starts. So that's what I did. And I went out and she demonstrated the technique for having an energy orgasm. and said, now you try. And took me about 10 minutes of, rocking my pelvis, pulsing my PCs, and moaning. And I had this mind-blowing experience that really set my life in a very different direction. And so after that, I decided that I would start studying. And so I just studied with anyone I could. Mostly at that time, of course, it was the kind of very popular American Tantra that doesn't quite have the traditional roots that we
ultimately
later
landed on. Yeah.
And the focus was kind of very heavily on the sexual aspects. But I learned a lot, and I did this teacher training and came back. The training really emphasized hands-on work, which I knew that I did not want to do. But I did want to teach, so I came back and I gave this lecture. And Patricia was there, and she came up to me after the lecture, and we exchanged email addresses and
started a whole conversation that, emails back and forth, and finally I suggested we meet over coffee, and that turned into sushi. And during the course of it, I'm like, what's going on? Are you going to be my teacher? And if you teach me this stuff, what does that look like? And
I said, having decided that I wasn't going to work hands-on with students or clients or whatever, and also because we'd been on a sacred sexuality listserv together, I knew that she really understood a lot of this stuff and energetically was probably more attuned than I am. And so I said, I really don't think there's anything I can teach you.
And I thought, well, can't we at least be friends? I'm really enjoying this conversation. Mark had a better suggestion.
I said, why don't we explore this on a sexual level? And so we basically got together to be practice partners.
It really worked well for me. At the time, there was a current in the culture, which unfortunately is still there, of
the rules and the game and all that dating stuff.
So where relationships are seen as one-upmanship and manipulation, and I just never understood that dating, wait, how many dates? Do they call? Don't call? I'm like, let's just, I don't even want to have dinner, okay? Let's just not go through all of this. So it worked perfect. And what we discovered is that the practices are profoundly powerful, and if you're practicing with someone who has a good amount of qualities that you respect, you're creating circumstances in which you can fall deeply in love, and that's kind of what happened.
And so then just to go back to the Tantra aspect in our background, about 6 months after we got together, we started working with our teacher, who's based in Australia. His name is Dr. John Mumford, or Swami Ananda Kapila Saraswati, really one of the pioneers in bringing sexual Tantra to the West in the 70s. But he has a traditional lineage and initiation as a Swami in the Saraswati order in India. And in classical Tantra, there's an idea of lineage and transmission, of passing things down from teacher to student, and that was important to us. And so we consider him our guru, and we've been with him for 15 years.
Yeah, since close to day one.
Wow, that's wonderful. That's 15 years and 4 books later. You two are obviously living your passion. I'm just wondering, because I have to make sort of a joke. I'm wondering if the opera star doesn't quite actually have screaming orgasms, but has operatic orgasm.
What do you think? We
It must sound
That's
beautiful.
what we should ask.
Yeah,
They
if you
sometimes
hear some
start chiming
screaming in the background, it's our birds.
I have quite a, I don't know, I'm usually flying, so I'm not so sure of the sounds I make, but
She actually, when she was performing, she had to be very careful about not being too vocal,
so
because she had to rest her vocal cords.
so it's a real
Fortunately, that's
treat
not an issue
to
anymore.
not even worry. I can allow grunts in my repertoire now, which is like, wow. You can't grunt when you're singing opera.
But I mean, to respond to the point, it's like vocalizing is really important, and I'm sure most of the audience is aware of that. But we recently had an experience where we had to be quiet, and it was really weird.
Surreal. It was really surreal.
Well, but as you say, that's a new experience in your
Yeah.
lovemaking. So, I'm sure that while it was surreal, it took you to some different, wild place that you either could decide to venture in again or just say, forget it. We like being loud and lovely. So.
Absolutely, and that's a really important point across the board, is that there's no one right or wrong way. There's no prescribed type of sex that's better than any other. There's different things to be learned in every experience that you have, and that's one of the things that we really stress in the realm of sexuality, is the idea of it being an adventure and an experiment and an exploration. And that goes back to what we're talking about relationally, that people think, oh, I know this person, I know everything about her, and she's just so predictable. But the truth is, there's always something new to discover. It may be very subtle, but it's always there. It's about paying attention to it.
Well, speaking of adventures, you mentioned in your book that you're both the subject of an fMRI study.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear about that.
Well, yeah, and I'm glad you brought it up. Nanwise is doing a lot of the cutting-edge research right now on
You
that.
guys saw her speak at
It is-
ASEC, I think. That was the study that we participated in at the ASEC conference.
Yeah, I don't know if that was my brain on the screen or not, but I find her results very fascinating, and the implications are huge, I think. And Nan is adorable, and we've known her for a while, and she just asked, and I was like, yeah, sure, I'll go do that. I've been in the machine 3 times, and the first 2 times was just
No, the first
time was just solo. So I was imagining stimulation, or I was actually stimulating my nipples, my clitoris, or intervaginally, or up in there.
So I had, of course, have to have a glass dildo because it's
Yeah.
an fMRI and you can't
I'm
bring
like,
any
no,
metal into
enjoy, dang, So, but you went through and imagined. You also imagined something very mundane, like doing chores, so they could get baseline mental picture, and it was partially funded by the Christopher Reeves Foundation. So, because they were working with people with full spinal injuries as well, and seeing if imagination lit up the same areas of the brain as actual contact, or and that's so yeah, it was interesting. They had a lot of start and stop. So
She also has her head restrained. You have to add to
you're
it.
strapped. It's very noisy. Your head's like really strapped down.
Yeah.
And, and then they said at the end, I was in the machine first time about 2 hours actually.
Wow.
And at the end they were like, okay, just give us your favorite orgasm. Let's just get your brain on orgasm. And I was like, okay. And I'm thinking, I'm like, okay, you're on the beach, and no, that's not working. I'm like, okay, you're at the gym, you wander into the wrong room, and that's not working. And then I was like,
fantasy hour?
Okay, you are in an fMRI machine, and there's people in lab coats watching you, and they want you to have an orgasm, and it was just like, oh,
Yeah, I have to say that she had the longest orgasm they recorded in the study, at least up to that point, and I think maybe she still holds the record. And I'm there in the control room, and I'm like, I'm so proud of her.
My gal.
Yeah.
But that brings us to, like, what that tells you is the plasticity of the mind and our erotic mind. And that also is something that is great to work with. As we age, especially, we go through various physical abilities, but you can always train your mind to respond sexually to something new. It's totally possible, and there are methods and techniques we talk about in a couple of our books on how to do that. So
now the next fMRI experience, if you want to continue down that road, because it's pretty hilarious. We were asked to. This was before Nan started actually doing her dissertation project, which involved partner stimulated orgasm. Mm-hmm. And so we were kind of the guinea pigs for her protocol. And so she said, okay, I want you to practice this at home because the machine is really unnatural and you've got to figure out the angles and stuff. So, and this, of course, we're not both in the machine having sex. It's digital stimulation, me stimulating her. And we got our massage table out. We tried to put it at the level that the machine would be at. And we worked on it, and we get there. And it's so like different. It's so different from what we practiced at home. So I'm right-handed, and I have to be on her right side. So
it looks like I'm like the Wicked Witch of the West, right? Just my calves and my feet are sticking out of this big tube. I mean, it was really...
and so we start out, and I'm having to reach across my body, and she's like a chest height. So I have to reach across my body to get in to stimulate.
It's like pokey.
Oh, no.
And so finally I figure out, okay, well, I really need to use my left hand, and what I need to do is just use my thumb. But we couldn't have eye contact. We couldn't have any of the things.
All these things that we
have.
Usually like keeps all of it. You know, we really feed off of one another. So.
So we finally achieved, and we don't like having orgasm as a goal, but in this context, there was a goal, and we finally did it for science.
Yeah.
And
and afterwards, I was asked to rate the orgasm, and I felt like, oh,
and I'm like, she's going to give me a 3 or 2.
I gave it a 5, and it was just like, I just felt so awful because usually, you know, he's 11, you know, whenever it's like, wah, you know, so yeah, that was quite of an experience, but it was really thrilling to see the results of the studies, you know, and what they're finding out. It's really fascinating.
Well, one of the things they're finding out is that the vagus nerve is often plays a role in orgasm, and that means that even if you have a full spinal injury, if the vagus nerve is intact, there's
still a lot of pleasure. Still, yeah.
And the other piece that's really important, which Patricia sort of alluded to before, is that the same brain regions light up if you're thinking about having an orgasm as if you're actually having one. And the implications of that are pretty amazing, really, especially for people who have any kind of problems. And it goes back to sort of the kind of tantric orgasm and energy orgasm. And if you're thinking about it as an orgasmic experience, you're wiring yourself to have that type of orgasm.
Nice. Yeah, it's really interesting because I just got finished reading The Masters of Sex, and of course there's that Showtime series on the Masters of Sex right now, and you know they're the pioneers. I mean, they're why sex therapy even exists at this point in time. But it's amazing how in the video they talk about or show them being very clinical, you know, starting like you talked about, measuring the areola contractions and expansions and everything else. It's sounds like it's a little bit like that, except you know, more high-tech equipment than they had back then.
Yeah.
Well, and of course, it is one of the problems with a lot of the scientific side of sexology is it's a lab, right? And you know, I mean, I think they're doing really, really good work at Rutgers, but there is always that the conditions that you're working under are about as far from what normal people encounter as could be.
Yeah.
So we now classify yourselves as scientific kinky.
The new genre.
Well, and
No,
also,
there is, yeah.
what you highlighted too, Patricia, was that particular scientific orgasm, which of course we know there was a goal in mind. You took one for research. You rated that as a 5, and I think that's really important also to talk about for our audience, because not every climax is going to be an 11. And you celebrated that. You had an orgasm. It was a 5 that particular time. Sometimes we have 5s. Sometimes we don't climax. Sometimes we have 10s. Sometimes we reach that 11. I think it's really important to highlight that for our audience who really is beginning to learn and expand the definition and their experiences of what orgasm can be. So I like that you rated it a 5 because that's what it felt like for you.
Right, and that's.
I think she was being generous.
I was asked to do it, but I think that's what you're talking about. Often people will, mainly female body or cisgendered female body people, are underreport orgasm because you read descriptives of orgasm and they seem huge, and what, bombs exploding, dams bursting, and
fireworks going off.
Right, and if you're not experiencing that, then you could discount your pleasure and invalidate your own pleasure because you're trying to compare yourself with a descriptive. Like you don't know for sure. Someone could be exaggerating their writing or telling you what an orgasm feels like. So
or you've watched faked orgasms in porn and you think that's the way it's supposed to be.
Right. And so and I think also celebrating and delving into subtleties is a really great way to expand your capacity for pleasure. So not looking for bigger, better. I mean, there's only so strong a Hitachi you can come by, right? You gotta work with other kinds of stimulation and other kinds of pleasure so that you're always work in expanding your pleasure capacity.
I think this whole question is a really, really important one, and it has implications across the board. I mean, I think in the realm of sex therapy, there can be too much of an emphasis on orgasm, and especially in dealing with female patients who have sexual issues, and the whole anorgasmia, pre-orgasmia, et cetera, it tends to take people out of focusing on whatever pleasurable sensations they're having in the moment. I'm not saying that the therapy should be thrown out. I'm just saying that there is that component. We live in a culture that's super goal-oriented. And I think it's true also in a lot of the pop tantra stuff that's out there too. It's like, oh, tantric orgasms, it's got to be bigger and better and blah, blah, blah. Really, in the classical tradition, yes, those huge mystical experiences are great, but a lot of the practices are about noticing the most subtle stuff. Yeah. And if we lose that ability to move along a whole spectrum of experience, and we're always focusing on just the best ever,
I think I don't know where you're going.
We miss a lot.
You miss a lot. I think it can also be ungrounding. Like people can get heady and sort of out of themselves in a way because you're always reaching, and you're like, whoa.
But I can only get that kind of high if I take this workshop, and so people get hooked into just being workshop junkies as a result. And I use that term very, very loosely, but I've seen this a lot, having done a lot of tantra groups and everything. There's this high that happens in that setting, and often people go home and they can't replicate it.
Yeah, and I think that's a sales technique that a lot of people use. It's because that's what people want to hear. It's like, oh, how can I increase my orgasm? Where we teach, enjoy the journey, enjoy everything leading up to the orgasm. Orgasms are great too, but there's so much more than just orgasm. But that's the the catchphrase that people want to hear that brings them to that class. So we only have a short amount of time left, and I know you talk in your book about 10 myths about relationships, and I think that's so important because I was reading through it, and a lot of those myths ring true for me as well. So I'd love to see if we could cover some of those really quickly if we can.
How about 1 or 2 teasers? Because, you know, we do definitely want people to come and build an audience.
But I want to hear them.
You're going to get them. But, you know,
Don't tease me.
1 or 2, like, what's the biggest myth out there? How about that? What's the biggest myth out there that
Well,
you
we
just
start
felt?
with, it's hard to say what the biggest one is, but the one that we start with is you need to find a soulmate. Now, this is it's actually a very ancient concept. It goes back to Greece at least, the idea that we're somehow incomplete, we're missing our other half. It's really kind of become a huge cultural meme, you know, the Jerry Maguire line, "You complete me," and then there was a song in the mid-2000s with the same title. This idea of looking for the one is another way that it's often put.
Yeah, and how do I know that this is the one? You'll see articles like that. He's the one if he or she, you know, what. So what people are doing is they're defining or creating an artificial, like, ideal in their mind, and then sort of taking that peg or the pegs that they meet and trying to see if they fit in the, you know, like, are you it? Are you it? And then the whole time they're not seeing the human in front of them. Mm-hmm. And the fact is as long as you have skills, probably most importantly skill sets, enough values that are the same and enough personality qualities that you respect in one another, you can have a great loving relationship with probably thousands of people. I mean, there's not just one. And how do you do that math? How many billions of people, trillions of people are on the world? I mean, what if they were born in Uruguay and you're up here in Canada? Oh my God.
And you're never going to meet, right?
And we don't have airplanes to fly there, yeah.
So the thing with the soulmate, there are a few other things with the soulmate. One is that it keeps us in this state of or it can easily keep us in this state of longing, of looking for that one person, of getting hooked on the new relationship energy, and then getting really disappointed when we see that the person that we've attached all of this, you know, this idealized set of qualities to doesn't live up to our expectations. So then we got to move on and try again and try to find that soulmate. And oh no, this isn't the one. So the next one is the one.
And this is probably a big recipe for what a lot of the serial monogamy we see going on in our culture.
And online dating preys on it big time
or
too.
Love addiction. You know, people are like, yeah, it's marketing and online dating services, which, by the way, while they do get people to meet one another, their algorithms mean nothing. They're just data collecting. And those guys own big corporations, and they're just finding out if you like to drink whiskey and if you are, you know, a bicyclist, and you know, and they're just doing market research on you.
Yeah. I think those dating sites serve to find something in common so people know what to talk about with the person that they meet online, and that's really about it.
Mm-hmm.
They also are great and very, very widely used, more so than anybody will admit, for hookups.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's funny how people are ashamed of that too. I keep telling you how people I've talked to, they'll say, well, how did you guys meet? And they'll kind of look a little sheepish, and it's like, well, we met online. It's like, oh, great.
Yeah.
You're fine. There's no problem with that, but why be ashamed of it?
Well, I'm really glad that you brought up that myth, because I think it does a disservice to so many people, because they feel that there's something wrong if they're not with the one, and potentially like give up looking to have a fulfilling, deep, enriching experience. And I'll end this really quickly with a friend of mine that I know from a long time ago. I haven't been in contact with him for quite some time, but the fact that this statement came out of his mouth, I thought was so profound. He said to his older brother, stop looking for perfection and create a perfect situation, and whatever that loosely perfect, from whatever you are with today. So stop looking.
Are you saying I'm not perfect?
No, you're always perfect. Always. But he said that like create perfection within. So I thought that was beautiful. But I want to tell our audience that we really look forward to welcoming in person Patricia and Mark, and they'll talk much more about Partners in Passion, a guide to great sex, emotional intimacy, and long-term love. That's next Tuesday in Denver, Colorado. All of the details are on the website. You do have to purchase tickets, whether ahead of time or at the door. Space is limited, so please look at bedevents.com for more details.
And we're at Brio Restaurant, which has great food, so I highly recommend that you just show up there and have dinner.
Join us for dinner conversation.
Yeah.
So that about wraps things up tonight for Naked Talks. We want to thank you all for being a part of this potent and juicy teaser conversation. Again, we would like to thank our sponsor, TantraPM, for all the work that they do. We have just a few more minutes, and I was curious. You two are a loving couple working together. Dan and I are a loving couple working together.
Most of the time.
Yeah, sometimes we're not so loving. But we're taking some tips from the two of you. How fun is it that combined joy that you talked about at the beginning, that combined force that keeps you together is actually about sex and intimacy and passion? Don't we have the greatest passions that we've turned into missions and our jobs? Aren't we so fortunate?
Yeah.
We really are.
And you two have a bunch of other things that are going on as well. I'd love to get real briefly what's coming up for you guys, because I know you're coming to Colorado. You're doing book signing tour, so fill us in a little bit about that too.
In about 2 minutes, can you?
Right. That Laughing Lotus, is that correct? I should have been prepared.
One of the things
you can find it on our website.
Is that Denver?
Yeah, in Denver. Okay. And
our website is TantraPM.com.
And we have a calendar. So we'll be in Denver for the entire week. And we're also signing at about 14 different venues that are going to carry our titles. So you'll be able to find a signed copy at like Tattered Cover or Barnes & Noble or your local independent bookstore as well.
Great.
Oh, wow. Great. You two are busy. 14. And by the way, I love Tattered Cover. So if you haven't been there, go early before your book signing, because it's such a fun place to walk around and find all these different nooks. To me, like the epitome of old-time bookstore. So you two are awfully busy. I want to thank you again on behalf of the Turtles and also our audience. What you do, you have a very rich life, and I want to point out that that's a second I hear a passion that you two share is the conservation of the turtles. Really appreciate you being flexible with the calendar, you being here with us, you coming to visit us live in person next week, and that you share the same ideals and goals that we do, is bringing this information to a wider audience with love and attention and detail, and with the positive attributes rather than all the negative ones. So thank you for the work that you do.
Thanks.
Well, thank you.
This has been a great conversation.
Yeah. Really always fun talking with you guys.
And you will answer so many more questions in regards to the book when we see you in front of our live audience. So definitely want to point that out. So stay tuned and come on and visit us next Tuesday.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. We'll talk to you soon. Appreciate it.